A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to TV shows that deserve the spotlight. Now, this next pick, I'm sure some of you might have great memories of this series, but for a show that had lasted for less than 3 years, Freakazoid, which ran between 1995 and 1997, with varying reruns on different networks happening from time to time, even to the present. But it does seem that, especially in recent years, the show happened to be a bit too expensive just to have run on varying networks. Some might have agreements with it being the best decision, while others are still trying their hand to get it to run on local networks, cable, satellite access, whatnot. But I'm sure that with digital releases being more prevalent, it probably would be a better idea to have it sold on YouTube or potentially streamed on certain platforms like Netflix or Hulu. But the main thing, though, is that Freakazoid, at least at the very time that it was originally around, it was not just any kind of superhero series. It was basically like a living spoof that ran for less than 3 years. And I suppose that can truly be backed up by the original creators. There were 4 people involved. And believe it or not, one of them was the one and only Steven Spielberg. Yeah. Who would have thought that he could basically go from cinematic masterpieces like Duel, Jaws, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind to this? And this was many years after his original golden age had basically come and gone. And while he hadn't necessarily gotten that far to creating such big highlights that were extremely critical and financial on the basis of success. But I can probably be certain that this probably was something else he had in mind. Creating a cartoon for kids, if they're not necessarily old enough to look at the many amazing feats that he's done in cinematic history, which of course were much earlier than this anyways. So of course when people are going to watch these older films, contrast to most new films that are coming out right now, I can't really be sure how many people are going to be able to remember that stuff as much as we could, but we'll just have to wait and see. Anyways though, Freakazoid itself only had a few seasons, and as such, let's just roll through the episodes. Yeah. Not necessarily long, but also not too short. Having 30, 40 episodes certainly was a pretty good way to go. But of course we know that the series itself didn't really last that long, only because of the fact that it had some pretty big expense riding on it. A superhero show that's all about a crazy character who makes funny faces and intimidates his enemies to every possible point that he could do. And only after watching 3 episodes of the show, I can at least say I've had some pretty good impressions on this whole thing. And I really gotta say, one other thing about it is the fact that the titles are pretty spontaneous. You got titles that are extremely long with all kinds of plot points that are highlighted in them, almost as if they were spoilers. While other episodes just happen to simply be given the subliminal title of episode something. Yeah, can't really be too certain about why they wouldn't come up with titles for every episode, just a number of them. But it doesn't necessarily matter though. I find it to be a rather unique contrast compared to most other franchises. Shows, of course, that are simply there for the heck of it, with all titles of their own for each episode. But with this, it's a bit of a different story. Though I will consider this not only a piece that's definitely worthy because this is one of the only instances ever that has a 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Wow. I guess people were really fond of it back then. But today, we don't necessarily find a lot of significance in this. How many people can I see talking about the show Freakazoid? Well, not too many, unfortunately. I've hardly even heard people say it at all when going out in public. And I even gone so far to ask if anyone's watched Freakazoid. And basically, it's about 1 out of 10. So we could probably say Freakazoid's unfortunately turning into a fad. For some unknown reason, I guess I can't put my finger on that. But otherwise, it's incredible for what it is. I might have to get into the rest of the series just to find out what went wrong, why they terminated it, and more importantly, why is it hard to rerun it nowadays? So, regardless of what people think of it and how it does nowadays, I consider Freakazoid to be something that's certainly worth watching pretty much all the time. If it had such high critical ratings, how could it have not been financially successful as much as some other shows? It really kind of bugs me knowing that somehow they can rate it super high, but yet the money's not super high on it. Maybe Freakazoid was sidelined by Marvel and DC? Considering that it was the mid to late 90s, that's likely what happened. Otherwise, not much else to imply here. That pretty much covers it for this piece of TV shows that deserve the spotlights, and I'll be back once again with some more material to cover.